When does a contract really start? It might not be when both parties sign. Make sure you know what needs to happen before your contractual rights and obligations kick in. I'm Mike, founder of Starlit Contracts. We're here to help you negotiate and use contracts with confidence. We're looking at the contract date, conditions precedent, and the effective date in this video. Now let's get into it. Let's look at the topic in summary. The first thing to note is that the contract date, conditions precedent, and the effective date are usually defined terms, and they often appear in Clause 1 or in the definitions section of the contract. These definitions are used to make clear that the date that a contract is signed is different to the date when most rights and obligations actually begin. So how do these terms work in practice? The contract date is usually when the final contract party signs, in other words, the second signature, whereas the effective date is when the main contractual rights and obligations kick in. It could be when services begin or when payment milestones start. Conditions precedent sit in between the two. These are specific actions or tasks that need to happen in order to trigger the effective date. Should you care about this? It depends on your deal. Ask yourself, do I need something from the other side before I'm ready to start fulfilling the contract? If the answer is yes, then distinguishing between the contract date, conditions precedent, and the effective date is a great way to protect yourself and to manage risk. Let's look at a practical example. Quality supplier signs a contract with needy customer. Supplier's job is to install windows, but only to start 3 months after the effective date, so that they have enough time to manufacture the windows. Now, here's the catch. The contract only becomes effective when needy customer provides a letter of credit. That's a financial security issued by a bank to guarantee payment. But needy customer keeps asking supplier to start work, even though they haven't provided the letter of credit. So what could go right for the supplier? Well, the supplier can hold their position. They've got a contract that clearly says, no work starts until you give me that letter of credit. So even if the customer pressures them with daily emails and asks for updates, the supplier can say, I'm not starting until the condition is met. That protects the supplier from taking on risk, especially if there's any doubt about the customer's ability to pay. Now let's flip it. What could go wrong? Let's say the supplier caves into the pressure. They start purchasing materials and manufacturing windows even though the customer hasn't provided the letter of credit. Or maybe the contract doesn't have a condition precedent and the supplier starts preparing for the deadline. In both cases, the supplier incurs costs without any payment security. And if the customer doesn't pay, then the supplier is left holding all the risk, possibly with no legal recourse except to file a claim. Let's look at a sample clause and some key considerations together. This contract is dated, and then you insert the date of the contract. The date inserted here is defined as the contract date. This could be a date that you choose or when the last party to the contract signs. Next, the contract is effective when Party 1 completes all conditions precedent to the satisfaction of Party 2. That's defined as the effective date, and often there's a sentence that sets a deadline, like, the effective date must be no later than, and then you insert a latest date for the contract to be effective. That prevents the contract from hanging open forever. If the effective date isn't achieved by then the deal might end before it really got started. Lastly, conditions precedent means, and then you insert whatever conditions precedent are needed to achieve the effective date. Conditions precedent vary from contract to contract. However, they will often oblige a party to provide some sort of financial security or a performance bond. Alternatively, a condition precedent could be for one of the parties to get a permission from an official authority or regulator that is needed for the work to start or finish. Let's look at your key takeaways. First, the effective date can be different to the day when the contract is signed, and that is helpful when something needs to be done before most rights and obligations kick in. Second, conditions precedent help control when obligations should start. If you're going to include them, keep the list to what is really necessary and have realistic timeframes to achieve them. Lastly, if you're the supplier and are under pressure to begin early, understand the risks and try to negotiate some cost coverage if the contract falls through. If you're ready to take your next step to negotiate and use contracts with confidence, then visit us at starlitcontracts.com, where you can access more content, participate in interactive sessions, and be part of our community. I look forward to seeing you there.